Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Richard Atherton. Gary Borland, former chief test pilot for the MOD in the UK, former very successful businessman, and now a leading figure in your church. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Richard. Great to be here.
No, it's fantastic to have you. And I can safely say our first fighter pilot on the show. So I feel somewhat honoured, and that definitely got a bit of interest on social. And you know, there's a long arc to your story, but maybe we should start with that, because I'm sure that's going to be fascinating to people. So you left school, right, 18, to join the RAF.
Yes.
Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So maybe we should start there. What drove you to that decision? And
I guess since as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I just thought it'd be the most amazing thing. And so it was kind of like a childhood dream. And it's interesting with my children now, because I sort of expected them to have a childhood dream, you know, that I was trying to outwork. And of course, they haven't. And that's a little bit of a shock for me, actually. But of course, it all makes complete sense. Why would you at 18 routinely know exactly what you want to do, or at 16? The interesting thing for me, though, was that although I really wanted to do it, I actually didn't believe that I would be able to do it. You know, my schooling, I went through school, I thought I was a bit thick. I thought other people were much more clever than me. Amazing words that people speak over you as well, what teachers can say about you, which I'm not critical of them, but you can say things about people that sort of land with them and stick with them and try to motivate you to do better. And sometimes, of course, depending on who you are, how you're wired, your different stage of life, your context, maybe that doesn't motivate me. Maybe it just reinforces what I think I believe about myself. So I went through school really with a belief that this would be an amazing thing to do, but that I probably wouldn't be able to do it. But I was gonna try really hard. So I applied, I think, when I was about 17, and I was still in short trousers, I think. So they said, "Come back when you're wearing long trousers." So I decided to leave school at the end of what would have been the first year of A-levels here, which was what called Piles in Scotland. So I left there and joined the Air Force as a flight systems technician, thinking that was a good way in. With hindsight, I'm not sure that was I had a great time, but I'm not sure that was a really smart thing to do or not. My parents, who were incredibly supportive, I'm not sure they thought it was a great idea either. It's just jack schooling and go and do something that might lead you to somewhere else. But in any event, I did, and I reapplied once I was there. Now, I did about 2 years, I think, between starting basic training as a technician through to starting officer training was exactly 2 years. So I did my trade training, went to a squadron in Scotland, in Lossiemouth. Beautiful part of the country. I don't know if you've ever been up there. Staggeringly nice. Oh, stunning. It's some sort of microclimate.
Okay.
But I spent probably 8 months there, and then I went to RAF Cranwell for flying training. But it's been really interesting, Richard, how through, and I've heard other people describe this in time with other career fields as well, feeling like you're a bit of a fraud, feeling like, yeah, well, you know, I got here, but they're just going to catch me out now, aren't they? You know, I'm going to be found out at officer training, and I'm not really okay for that. I'm going to be found out when I start flying training that I'm not really good enough, and that the things I think or believe about myself are true, and it will all come to pass. And well, hey, it will have been great anyway. It'll be, at least I would have tried. I'm not sure how far you want me to go with the story, because this can go.
I'm enthralled, and I'm just thinking, when you were the engineer, did you always visualize yourself flying the plane, or did that sort of emerge as you went along?
Probably, I'm not even sure. Visualized, desperately hoping. And in fact, ironically, when they realized, I was working in an engineering bay at Lossiemouth, and when they realized I'd been accepted for pilot training, they sent me out onto the flight line to be a flight line mechanic, seeing aircraft off, seeing them in. And I recall when I went along for a test pilot interview, one of the senior tutors there who was interviewing me, I had strapped him in when he was a Buccaneer pilot on that squadron when I was an airman. It's a really strange sort of thing. And I sort of said I remembered it. He said he remembered me. I'm pretty sure he didn't. Why would he? But yeah, that was another strange experience.
And in your mind, you were thinking, one day I'm going to be the one getting strapped in.
Well, one day I'm hoping, but even then, there's this overwhelming awe of something that felt beyond reality, but was alive in my mind and my heart. It burned in me in a way that I can't really describe it. It burned in me. It was something I so wanted to do that, giving up, not doing, but the deep-seated belief that I could do it was quite low.
Oh, it's quite low, but the hope was stronger.
Oh, massively. And that's a great. I talk to my boys about this now. One of my boys is 18, the other's 21. I talk to them about this whole thing of, you can pitch low and you can get low. You can pitch for something you're passionate about. And somewhere the combination of passion and capability merge. And if either of those two things are missing, it's probably not going to happen, or you're going to be very uncomfortable when you are there. But when those two things collide, my goodness, extraordinary things happen, don't they?
Oh yeah, I can from my own experience, that there's things where you're just desperate for something to happen, and no matter what, it sort of comes to pass.
So doesn't it link a little bit to this notion of when people say you can do anything you want to do? Well, actually, I kind of view that you can't. There are some things. So, for example, I know that maths was one of the things I really struggled with at school, and quite honestly, I struggle with it now. I just don't get it. My brain is not wired in that way. I can formulaically remember how to do things. If you ask me to apply something to something else, not a chance. So could I go and be a maths professor? No. Could I go and do something that involves a lot of maths? No, I couldn't. And that's probably perhaps a superficial example, but there are many, many examples where, for me, that it's not the case we can do anything. It is the case we can do extraordinarily more than we believe possible. It is how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And did you find that? So you're there, you're desperate, you're hoping, and how did it go? I mean, what's the competition like? I mean, I'm trying to relate it to, because this is all anecdotes to me. I've never been in that kind of such a highly competitive environment. Were there just a few slots available out of the cohort of officers, or what was the path to actually getting your ride, so to speak? Your first ride?
Well, I guess people would love to tell you how extraordinarily difficult it is, and how incredible, therefore, they are. I've got some news that it's not true. And I just look at myself and the reality of myself and my life, and I think, so many people could do this, given an opportunity and given the passion to do it as well. So was it competitive? Yeah, for sure. But then many things are competitive, aren't they? And we can often hold things in a higher level of awe than we ought to. So there were some amazing people, great people I both served with, and I suppose competition is really only competition to get through the door. The flying training system, many people failed the flying training system at various parts of it for various reasons. But the desire always, by those, in my experience, of those instructing us, was that there was a place for everyone. We weren't trying to cycle. They weren't trying to cycle out a whole lot of people. So people were for you. They wanted you to succeed. And again, that creates an environment where I'm sure some people felt competitive in it, but I felt very competitive with myself. I was trying to do something for me, maybe even, dare I say, prove something to me, overcoming some of the feelings from previously. I'm not sure, but I think there was an element of that too.
Have you ever dug deep into that as to wondering if there was, what were the deeper drives for you to become a pilot?
More so in the last few years, actually, where I've started to get much more comfortable. I've got very comfortable now, but I don't know, perhaps 5 years ago, I'm a little bit more starting to unpack who I was, what drove me, what had driven me, what did I feel, because that's not something I would talk a lot about. And in the process of doing that, starting to look back and reflect on some things in my early life, because this sort of anecdote about how I felt going through school, that didn't really occur to me until many, many, many years later. I knew it at the time, I acutely felt it, but I didn't really relate it to where I was or what I was doing. And the benefit of getting older, of course, is you can reflect sometimes, and it's okay to be you. And it's okay to look back and think, yeah, maybe some of that was driven by something other than this just deep desire to fly or whatever the example is. And I think one of the biggest things that's occurred to me is the whole notion of emotional connectivity with self. Do I emotionally understand me and my drivers? And it became, when I started to unpack that a little bit with some help from some amazing people, oh my goodness, no, evidently not. I really don't understand that at all.
Right.
And if I link that back to parenting, I had wonderful parents. Sadly, both of whom have passed away, and my father passed away recently. Incredible people, wonderful parents. But my father in particular was from a generation and his own background where sitting down talking about emotional things with others just really wasn't something he did. And if he did, I didn't have exposure to it. So I would probably say I left home at 18, an emotional infant. I could emotionally connect with people, relate to people, I had strong empathy for others, but I didn't emotionally understand myself. And to be honest, I don't think I wanted to even go there because I didn't know what it was, how to unpack, and what would happen when you did unpack. I wish with hindsight I had some help doing that 30 years ago. I really, really do, because there were some things there that would have enabled me to interact differently, to be different in a way that I couldn't access at the time. So I try and do that with my boys now. They don't always like it, but they're great, and just getting them to kind of open up. But it starts with me. I need to create that vulnerability in self. I need to show them that I'm prepared to be open to them, which gives them a route into being open with me and more comfortable. And we've had some great conversations around that recently. Right.
Yeah, and especially for males, it's more taboo, isn't it? And it's less encultured in males. I remember when I first joined a 12-step meeting in my early 30s, and we had to do this round around the meeting, and everyone had to say what they're feeling, and I was like, well, I feel fine, and I remember it took me years to actually practice using words like I feel scared or I feel sad. Yeah. That just building some articulacy around feelings took some time, right? When I first started doing something similar to what you're describing, I suspect, yeah.
Yeah, it's when I look at that now, Richard, if I look at that in the context of leaders, in the context of anyone, getting in the mirror is a great place to be, maybe with a bit of support. Get in the mirror and start to let some things emerge and unpack, because when they do, extraordinary things around you start to change. Whereas we often spend a lot of our life looking out the window, pointing at everybody else. Great phrases you hear daily, don't you? Like, oh, you made me do X. Well, you probably didn't make me do anything. I responded to something you did, but that's not your fault that I responded that way. That's me. And I wonder about stereotyping and conditioning, and I talked a bit about my father and his parents who loved him, but who just emotionally almost certainly weren't connecting in that way. But when you read Men Are From, is it Men Are From Mars, Women? I've not read it, by the way. Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and it culturally reinforces all these stereotypes where there's no doubt that, or it seems to me, there's little doubt that men and women are wired differently, but of course there's such a spectrum of both and such an overlap of both that, my goodness, we've got to be careful about pigeonholing, stereotyping, putting labels on people.
Yeah, that's right, and also but then also do not go too far the other way. Of course, there's value in controlling feelings, and especially, I suppose, as men, as warriors, and or women as warriors for that matter. There will be a value in suppression of feelings as well. So it's not like that. There's nuance in this, but certainly having that ability to articulate one's feelings and is definitely access to self-knowledge. I think it's what certainly has been for me.
Yes, and your notion of controlling it, it's appropriate airing and sharing. I suppose it's like any way of communicating or interacting with other people, isn't it? There's a time and a place.
Right.
It's probably not okay in the boardroom just to start blubbing because you're overwhelmed by some particular emotion. However, in other cases, it may be entirely appropriate.
Yeah, even in the boardroom. I mean, Steve Jobs was famous
right.
for bursting into tears right in the middle of meetings, and we can have the Steve Jobs debate, but certainly he was effective in many ways. So that's interesting. Okay, so you get to just back to your story. So that first, so what was it like the first moment then? Can you still recall that your first flight, or is there a sort of a marker in your mind when you're like, okay, I've done it, I've made it, I've become the guy I would so desperately hope to become?
No, and probably never actually, Richard. I remember when I was in business sitting down with a mentor I had, fabulously good mentor, who asked me, and I was probably 40 at the time, and he said, can you tell me something that you're really proud of that you've done in the past? And I said, now this wasn't about false humility. This really genuinely, I'm part of my wiring now is, or certainly was, that if I could do it, then I should be able to do it. So there's nothing to be proud of. I can either do it or I can't do it, and I should do my best. And but I couldn't come up with anything. And he said, well, hang on a minute, you've done this, and you've done this, and you've done this, and you. I said, yeah, they were all great things, amazing things to have done, but I'm not proud of myself for having done them. I've just done them. They were great. I love doing them. And there was something unbalanced about that. It was a very astute question, actually, because there was something a bit unbalanced about that. Even if you replace the word pride with pleased or something perhaps less emotive, still I couldn't have come up with something. I could have talked about enjoyment I got from it, but not something that I would relate back to myself. So in terms of the first flight, the whatever, it was just a part of a journey that then went on for 2 decades. 2 decades of tremendous fun, but feeling through much of it that you're about to trip up somewhere. It's going to end at some point. When I was doing my trade training, as a flight systems technician, I used all the money I had to pay for a private pilot's license. And so I would cycle, it was like an hour and a half each way, every weekend, every Saturday and Sunday, rain, wind, horrible journey, actually. I got my bike at 7 o'clock in the morning, I'd cycle to the flying club, I'd fly, I'd cycle back, I'd do the same on Sunday. It was all about trying to get myself as prepared as I could. So I'd flown before, and I could, I had a private pilot's license by then. But getting into this jet, which looks antiquated now, it's called a jet provost, climbing into that, getting strapped in. Now you've got a big helmet, you've got all your gear, it feels slightly suffocating, but it was great, tremendously good fun. But I never ever felt, right, I'm there. I was always looking for what's next. What's the next challenge? What's the next mountain to climb? Which is, on the one hand, is very positive. On the other hand, you have sort of notion of eternal dissatisfaction. You're never there. So you're never in the moment as you could or should be in the moment, which I think is really important. And maybe it's just because I'm getting old.
Well, there may be something that for you to uncover there about this reticence to absorb what's happened and acknowledge where you've got to. I mean, yeah, maybe there's something to look at there, or maybe not. Right?
Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe it's just what it is.
It's just what it is. Right, and then back. So you're flying, and then the transition. So you transitioned then from being a pilot to a test pilot. So how did that work? How does that transition go? Because that's another sort of elevation, is it, in that path?
It's probably a specialization more than an elevation. So when I finished flying training, I went onto a tornado squadron, ground attack tornadoes in Germany, and then in sort of third year of that tour was the Gulf War. So I flew in the Gulf War out of Dhahran, did about 20 combat sorties. From there, I went back to teach on the Tornado Weapons Combustion Unit, as it was called, where we taught people how to fight with airplane effectively, use it as a weapon system. So I taught on there, and then I was really fortunate to get an exchange tour with the US Navy, flying A6 Intruders out of Whidbey Island, which is in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I don't know if you've ever been up in the Pacific Northwest in the States. What a place. I can absolutely recommend a visit. It's just tremendous. A beautiful house we had, but amazing place, fantastic people. I was then fortunate enough to be able to go out to the aircraft carrier. I flew off the USS Kitty Hawk day and night, which was, again, just tremendously good fun. That's pretty eye-watering the first couple of times. But again, that's just great. But again, that's an example of where, in my experience, a lot of people love to make what they do sound incredibly difficult. Because if it's difficult, not many people can do it. Maybe it says something about me, right? And I'm thinking, well, no, actually, all of these people got here by various routes. The majority of them would be successful. The next time they got to the next stage, they'd be successful. And so, there isn't anything extraordinary about it. I always relate it to driving a car. I don't know if you remember when you first started driving a car. I remember driving my dad's Hillman Imp, which you probably won't even remember, Richard, do you?
No. Well, I can visualize it. Yeah.
You've seen it in a museum, have you?
Some grainy black and white footage.
Yeah. Imagine 5 of you jammed in there with all your luggage going from the west coast of Scotland to Bournemouth on a hot summer's day. Not great. Not a good journey. Anyway, how did we get to Hillman Imp?
I was just thinking, I'm reticent taking my kids in the car to this weather we're having right now in the UK, and we've got air-conditioned estate car, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I fancy the journey, but different time.
How did we get to Hillman Imp, Richard?
I don't know. So you're talking about going from the west coast of Bournemouth west coast of Scotland down to Bournemouth.
Yeah, that was pretty random, actually. That was linked to something else we were just talking about.
So you had been talking about in the northwest of the States, flying on.
Northwest.
Yeah.
Yes. So we spent, my wife and I, we didn't have children at the time. We spent 2.5 years up in the Pacific Northwest. Stunning part of the world, flying A6s, as I said, teaching students how to fly and to fight with A6, which was we're just such an amazing, really, really, really great time. Did lots of traveling around the US. We had a van. We made these little curtains in, slept in a van for weeks at a time. Just a great experience and great people. And actually, something that really struck us there was, when people, we caricature people, don't we, in groups of people, like Brits, Americans, French people, Germans, whatever. Americans, there's nearly 300 million of them in a vast continent that is so diverse, wonderful country, just incredible. Incredible people, incredible diversity through there. And we kind of started to get this glimpse of, the world is so completely different to the one we live in. And even within what appears to be the same geography is very different again. So we finished that tour, came back to the States, from the States, Then I did another tour in Germany as flight commander on Tornado Squadron. And then during that, I applied for test pilot training. I did the test pilot course, which was a year-long course, the Empire Test Pilot School. And then I had to do maths. I mean, that was a shocker. So this is where you have to get straight about yourself now. So the maths on the course, if you do maths well, is probably not a big deal. For me, absolute nightmare. So I had to get a maths tutor who was a wonderful lady called Anne Marie, and she sat me down on the first session before it, and she said, "So can we just sort of baseline where you are?" And I tried a little bit of baselining myself before she arrived, because I thought this is a bit awkward, really. And I said, to be honest with you, if you presented me with different types of fractions, I would be struggling with them right now. She said, right, so we've got quite a bit of work to do. Well, yes, we do. But she was great. Anyway, I did the test pilot course, which was a great experience. Then I was a Jaguar and Tornado test pilot for a couple of years. Went off to the Advanced Command and Staff course. I then came back as commanding what was called Fast Jet Test Squadron at the time, where all the aircraft fast jets were tested, again at Boscombe Down. I then went back to the Staff College to teach in the Advanced Command and Staff course, which has got about 50 nations of officers for a year. Incredible experience, really, really fabulous. And again, context, culture, understanding people, differences, where they come from. One of my, I'm digressing a little bit, but one of the things that really struck me and stuck with me was a debate in the main lecture theatre in front of all the students between a senior Israeli and a senior Palestinian. And the Palestinian stood up and he gave his hour's presentation, however long it was. And I remember him sitting down and me thinking, and subsequently this was shared by many others, wow, yeah, absolutely, I can see that. Oh my goodness. And the Israeli stands up and he does his hour. And I think, oh my goodness. And then you realize there is so little we know and so much we purport to know. Yet here were two people, and I could quite easily align with either fully in what they were saying. A tremendous lesson, actually. And, you know, when I hear something behind, my sort of thing now is behind every story, there's a story. When I'm hearing something, there's something else going on there. There's something in context that I don't know, that the person maybe hasn't even accessed. Anyway, that was Staff College. And then I came back from there as the Ministry of Defence Chief Test Pilot, right, which was the sort of final tour I did. I was really fortunate to be able to fly all the helicopter types, all the fast jet types, all the heavy aircraft types. Tremendous job, tremendous people, just doing a great job. So I left there in 2008, and then I joined Kinetic. So that was the end of my flying.
Right. Well, so one thing that struck me there, actually, just in terms of your insight about how people have the story, and there's a story behind the story, and, you know, at some level, you know, there's a humanity in all of us. So how did you reconcile that with, presumably, when you're in Iraq and you're flying sorties and you know that there may be, you know, people losing their lives as a result of your actions? Isn't there a need to sort of other them in some senses, to separate yourself in order to be able to do that? I mean, how does that work? I mean,
I'd like to give you an answer that it was a sophisticated thought and emotional process, but it wasn't. I guess one of the things about aviation, unlike a lot of soldiering, is that you're relatively distant. Now, you might argue if you were you know, in some sort of air-to-air engagement, that's more personalized, but it's still depersonalized. And therein lies a whole different world of, you know, when I depersonalize something, what does that allow me to do in terms of the way I act, the things I'm prepared to do, that I'm distant from the actual outcome of the thing I'm involved in. So I would say there really wasn't any processing of what that looked like at the time. I'm 27, I'm doing the job I've trained to do. I was desperate to be out there. You know, and maybe there's something about proving yourself as well. Maybe when you link back to that childhood, the not being good enough, there's this constant theme which I think runs through a lot of my life, which is proving myself to who? Invariably to myself, I think. But maybe not. Maybe that's a convenient story as well. And maybe there's something more there. So I never really rationalized or connected those two things, or tried to. I have subsequently, and of course I'll never really know what impact I had or didn't have. The legitimacy of the action, the legitimacy of the coalition, and Kuwait, Iraq. I could tell you the story I could tell you because that's the story I was told. A destabilized Middle East, Kuwait, the invasion. We have a narrative around that, which is a context which might or might not be right. So I've tried to explore a bit of that myself. In looking back, what did I actually think of that whole situation? So I was absolutely adamant that it was the right thing we were doing, and it's just interesting to explore it. Was it? I don't know.
But at the time you lent on that narrative is what, I mean, as well as your burning desire, if there was any conflict at all, it was assuaged by this narrative of helping to bring stability to the region or something like that.
Yes, because the notion of bringing legitimacy to our actions is very powerful. We see this all through history, don't we? We legitimize actions often against a very narrow context or a cause or something else, which can be extremely dangerous. So yeah, I perhaps wish I was able to think it out more at the time, or maybe I'm not. Maybe I just need to get on with my job. But I've tried reflecting subsequently.
Well, I guess those who would have been too philosophical probably got weeded out pretty early, I'm guessing. It sort of required a certain acceptance and compliance, presumably, to be effective.
Yes. Yeah, and I do recall, actually, something quite strange, which is, I think within the first, 2 or 3 weeks, we'd lost about half a dozen airplanes, and some of those were people I knew, a couple of really, really closely. In fact, just before it, a really good friend flew into the desert just before it started, flying very low, hit the desert, killed. But there was something kind of unreal about that. It was just, you would hear about people, the names, and you get up in the morning for breakfast and somebody didn't come back last night, and it was all just kind of normalized. Just stick it away in a box, which I believe you need to be able to do. It's interesting which box you're putting it in. Why is it so easy to put it in a box? And do you ever go into the box and try and get it out again? Which I have subsequently tried to do. I thought that's a really dark part of a cupboard sitting in there that's not been opened. I can just leave shut because it doesn't even niggle at me, except occasionally if I read or recall something about those individuals. So yeah, again, interesting inquiry for me, ongoing, probably some time.
Right. But just as you're saying that, I'm thinking we must have developed that as humans. I mean, we've been warring with each other for as long as we've existed, right? So we must have developed that psychological capacity.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, when you consider that some of those what feel pretty essential capabilities, if that's the right word, and how inappropriately we can then apply them or overlay them. So then people commit acts that you think, oh my goodness, how can you just go on with your life having done that? Well, it's possibly in the same box. It's possibly the same mechanism that allows things that are really aberrant to be coped with and to be managed. I don't know if it's possible.
Yeah. Okay, I don't quite know how I segue to this, but I did have a technical question on Facebook.
Oh, did you? Well, on Facebook, okay.
Yeah, for the people who knew you were on.
Oh, I hope it's not technical.
Did you get to typhoons? Did you fly though? Did that overlap?
When I was the chief test pilot, I flew a Typhoon in the States with one of the operation evaluation unit that I was commanding at the time. So Yes, I did fly. Tremendous airplane. It's fabulous. But I've flown many different types of aircraft now, and they're all different, and they're all tremendous. So some people will often ask, what's the best airplane? Well, it kind of depends what you want to do with it. If I want to go in at night, in rain, in low cloud, give me a Tornado, please, because it does it fabulously well. Don't give me a Typhoon to do that with, please. If you want something with more agility, with more air-to-air capability, with ability to integrate different weapon suites and communication systems and sensors, and then hey, I'll have a Typhoon, please, or I'll have one of those. I'll have one of those. If I want to be transported to Dubai on holiday, don't give me either, please. Give me something with a big seat and a
right.
That's what you want to do with it, yeah?
Right. So what he's asking is, what's the best rate of climb that you saw in a Typhoon?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. I'd have to Google that or something at the moment to even vaguely have an idea. But to be honest, because I had very little exposure to it, I only flown it for an hour and a half or whatever, I don't really know. I wasn't really looking at that particularly. But yeah, tremendous performance. Yeah, really eye-wateringly good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an airplane geek, but I was doing a bit of research before this interview and seeing that by some reckoning, the Typhoon was the best of the available fighter aircraft right now. Is it?
They all bring something different.
Fair enough. Okay, so now you've reached that level, chief test pilot, and then that's your jumping off point, right? And then you leave and go into business.
Yeah, so I left before the end of my tour, and I joined a company called Kinetic, defense security company. You perhaps know. And I joined as a director of flight operations. It was a role I sort of thought they didn't have for themselves, and I thought I could do for them. So I left, joined them, and then through a whole series of things, some of which were really unfortunate because people had got on well, I ended up as an operations director in one of the air businesses. I think there were 3 or 4 air businesses at that time. Then I ended up we had a new CEO arrived, and we did a bit of let's look at new leadership, and I ended up sort of in the pot for that, and got sort of connected with, and ended up getting one of the managing director roles, which out of one of the 3 businesses, air businesses, as we had then. But again, that was an example of. I said to Sharon, when I came home, I said, hey, I've just got this, hey, what's that all about? Right? Because there was a big thing in business about the size of the P&L you could run. You need to run an X amount size P&L and a Y amount, then you have to have this experience and that experience. And looking back, I just don't really think that's necessarily in all environments particularly credible. So I ended up with this P&L, with this business of 600 odd people, and it was a tremendous experience. But for as much as what I didn't know is what I did know. And the thing that I really, really wanted to get my head around early on was, how did I connect with people, and how did people connect with me? And just to cut a long, and I'll perhaps come back to that, but just to cut a longish story short, we then merged the businesses into 2 air businesses, and I led one of those. Then we integrated them into one business, and I then ended up as the managing director of that single air business in Kinetic. But I really carried forward with me this desire to understand what people thought, how they felt, because I had really started to access something for myself that said, okay, if I can look in the mirror and get a better impression of what are my sort of emotional triggers, what's underlying me, what are my underlying insecurities, fears, I can be pretty confident that there are many others out there, most of which I don't know anything about. And I can ask people, but the chances are that they're not going to tell me unless I build relationship. unless I can create an environment where they believe they have permission, truly believe they have permission to say what they think, then it will be very difficult to lead a large group of people effectively, and to understand what motivates them. Because we'd love to think, shareholder value is what drives our, well, of course, for many people, that's not the case. For some people, it might be, I can come to work at 9, I can go home at 4, and I can pick my kids up, and that's great. What are the things that drive each individual person, rather than hoping they all get cocooned into this little bubble that we might wish them to be in the corporation or in any corporation. So my journey of discovering self started to flow into, how do I make myself vulnerable with other people so I can start to create that environment? And by the way, Richard, I'm not suggesting for anybody listening to this that I did this brilliantly, because there are many things I didn't do well. But there were some things I think I learned that I applied that I think were reasonably effective. I started to build, and I had done since I joined Kinetic, groups of people who I knew would talk to me. And I started running what I call WIGOs, what's going on, these small groups, and maybe be like anything between 6 and maybe 10 people in them. And that's people who wanted to come along, sit with me, and talk about whatever they want to talk about. There was no agenda. And we'd sit down, sometimes we'd have cake and coffee, because sometimes that might be an inducement to come. But I learned more in those about leading people and what made people tick. And of course, it's only the people I'm interacting with than I did in probably most of the rest of my career, if I'm honest. Because I listened to people. I truly listened. And I listened through a lens of, I really want to know. And you're going to tell me some things that might cause a reaction in me, but I need to hear those, because now I have access to something I didn't know yesterday. And I can do something tomorrow about the thing you've just told me. Not necessarily fix something a person doesn't like, but I have an understanding now of the sorts of things that engage people, motivate, inspire, and roll them and where we're going. I could talk about that forever, but that's been a huge part of what I love doing now, which is about getting alongside people and sort of bringing the gold out in them, or trying to support them and bringing that gold out in themselves. And sometimes that journey also involves getting into the mirror, but getting alongside people with a story of your own and a narrative that says, I don't understand you, but I can tell you about me. I can tell you what it's been like for me. So I could perhaps build an environment where it's a safe environment, it's a trusted environment. And I describe the notion of getting in the trench with somebody who knows you're for them, truly believes that you're for them, and that's why you're there.
Right. And so how would people show up? You would just say open hours with Gary, come and tell me your troubles, or just a mechanism for that might be interesting for people.
Yeah, so we would put dates in the diary, and my PA Vicky, who was fantastic, she would put these dates in, and she'd sort of coordinate with people who wanted to come along.
Right, so it's a pure open invite, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes some people will come, sometimes a lot of people will come, sometimes they're oversubscribed, sometimes they're undersubscribed. What was really interesting was we also opened, so I had a blog that I ran as well, and I tried to create personal vulnerability in that blog as well. I thought, for example, I'd share some funny stories about what was happening at home, the boys who were younger at the time, and some of the things that they did. And quite a few people said to me, it's great to kind of connect the fact that you've got the same stuff going on at home as we've got, that the MD's kids are doing exactly the same as somebody else's kids. Yeah, they are, and probably more besides. So that was great. But we also opened or had a sort of chat forum on there. And when we first set that up, surprise, surprise, it's an indicator of culture, I think. Nobody says anything. Nobody comments on anything. And so I was really keen with the leadership that when we set this up, that it would have to be an extreme case where we went in and commented or tried to shut something down because it was inappropriate. because if we ever did that, nobody's going to say anything on there again. So this sort of online chat would, I worked with a tremendous lady who brought a lot of experience in this area with me and talked about the notion of when you get to the point people self-policing on a forum like that, then you've kind of got somewhere, because people are sharing, people are self-policing, nobody's intervening or having to intervene. But I was trying to create as many pathways as possible to connect with people so they truly believed that somebody wanted to listen. And that so I and the leadership could truly benefit from what it was they thought and felt and saw and believed and wanted and hoped for. And because without that, I'm just running around blind doing leadership stuff, dragging everybody along.
Right. And I think there's something to be said there about creating. I mean, it's sort of almost become a little bit of a hackneyed phrase now, but psychological safety, but this idea of creating fora where people do feel safe to speak the truth, and that being an important part of almost mitigating the problems with bureaucracy, because bureaucracy is great in the sense that it's an efficient way to flow information up and down an organization and creates a certain level of stability. But the downside is you get the real story, right? You're not getting the raw data about what's going on often. It's all synthesized. And so how do you create parallel communication channels? And it seems like you managed to do that.
Well, it was certainly partially successful. The challenge always, of course, is that you can do 100 things to create the environment. You can kill it with one thing, or you can set it back considerably with one thing. Kinetic used, I'm not sure what they use now, but they used the top 100 best companies survey for people, which was, again, a great vehicle because it was anonymized. So I was much more interested in the comments than I was the scores. And it's very easy to wish away individual comments as the dissenter, oh, they always say that, don't they? No, they're probably saying it for a reason. There's probably something we don't want to hear behind what they're saying. They may not be expressing themselves particularly well. They may be expressing themselves brilliantly, but we need to hear from them. And so we would collect all of those comments. We would sort of thematically organize them. Then we would assign a leader to each area of we then called it You Said We Did over the next year. And we had a leader updating everyone on where they were, and they put cross business teams together to get people involved, employees who wanted to be involved in it, and just another way of trying to get people engaged and really believe what we say. Because I can tell you I'm interested in you, but unless you experience it, it's all for naught. I don't believe you necessarily. So I'm passionate about it. I'm not an expert in it. I certainly wasn't an expert in it, but the very things that would have triggered me in the past and created emotional reactions and some of those comments that people made, I no longer feared. I welcomed them. I saw them as things I didn't know yesterday and something I could do something about tomorrow.
And so that ability to take these potentially triggering situations, did that start when you started in business, or were you seeing the beginnings of that when you were still at the MOD, or when did that transition start?
That's a good question. And that didn't start probably in Kinetic until a couple of years in, where I got together with a coach and I wanted to talk about coaching my leadership team. And she wanted to talk about me. That's a bit awkward. I'm thinking, well, I'm talking about me. I need to fix them. Yeah. And this lady who I won't name, but it is my firm intention to reconnect with her and just say thank you to her, because she started something that at the time just triggered a fireworks factory of emotions off of me, but was the beginning of something that started to unlock a whole range of things for me. So I went from that to that was the catalyst for the journey. And then we ended up probably a year or so later, engaging another organisation, and our very own Philida.
So Philida, who also works with FirstHuman, the sponsor of this podcast.
FirstHuman, which for me is such a privilege to be working alongside Philida and yourself and Audie, and it's just tremendous. But engaging with Philida was another really big steps in thinking about unpacking self again. And what I loved about the work we did with Philida and the team she was with was it was really focused on self. Let's stop looking out the window for a while. Let's look at self. Let's look at our reactions. Let's look at the way we listen and the way we speak and the language we use and the sort of things we say. And kind of a bit of a joke really about leaders can. There are two things they can do: they can listen and they speak, or maybe they can lift heavy boxes or something. But generally speaking, in a big organization, you're listening and speaking. That was life-changing, actually, for me. And it was life-changing in that I recall being challenged to take this stuff home and see how it works out before you start trying to export it. And you know what? The home environment for me was was a difficult place to do it, because that's probably the place I gave myself permission to behave the worst. I wasn't really accountable to anybody. Just if I was badly behaved, I could be badly behaved. But that accessed something in my home life with my wife, with my children, with relationships, which again was life-changing, profoundly impactful. And that was all about unpacking self. And I'm still on that journey, Richard. I'm a work in progress, but I hope I'll continue to be a work in progress for the rest of my life, because then I'll be learning something and I'll be having new things exposed to me, which give me access to new ways of being and thinking and supporting others and unlocking.
Right. And can you recall what was the first big thing you learned about yourself, or you had to accept about yourself in that process?
I think it would be about the notion of fears. So the word fear, this is context again, isn't it? Fear, I'm not, it's a fast jet pilot. I'm not frightened. I was in the Gulf War. I'm not frightened, am I? I wasn't. I didn't feel fear. I felt excitement. It was tremendous. And I sort of got through my life thinking, I'm not fearful. I don't fear things. And of course, I'm riddled with them. I'm riddled with insecurities. I'm riddled with fears. It's just that they're so well packaged. They're jammed in the cupboard. They're cemented in place. I don't even begin to know what they are. And certainly don't want to know what they are. And the revelation that I actually was riddled with fears and insecurities caused me to, against the backdrop of other things that had started to emerge from me, caused me to think, how good would it be if I was able to unpack that and get to a point where, although I would still be working probably the rest of my life to understand it all, to apply, but that I could begin to see something different, and that when I was triggered with some sort of emotional reaction, an interaction with somebody or something, that I could respond in a way that said, oh, that's interesting. Why do I feel the way I feel about this situation? And actually, I'm in the context of my journey, I'm there now. When I feel something like that, I actually now enjoy the sensation of, oh, that burns me. Why is that? I don't enjoy the burning feeling, but that is burning me. Why is it burning me? If I give you a very trivial example, but it's quite a powerful one. I was saying to Sharon, my wife, the other day, I was driving around a roundabout, and somebody cuts up in front of me. I mean, really close, and then they wave at me. Now, in the moment of waving, something changes. Something's completely diffused because the person appears to me to be acknowledging that something they did wasn't helpful or inappropriate or wrong, or however you want to describe it. Now, this is a depersonalized thing, a faceless person in a car, a nameless person in the car with whom I have no relationship. Had they waved and diffused something, if they hadn't diffused it, it had become a personal thing. What's personal about somebody cutting up in a roundabout? They didn't say, oh, here's Gary coming. I'm going to wait till he arrives, then I'm going to cut him up. Because I know that really annoys him. Oh, it's nonsense, isn't it? But the way I respond to that, and I've got much better at this now over the years. Or as I was describing to a friend the other day, people who, you might pull out of a garage and someone will keep driving at the speed they're driving at, or perhaps speed up a little bit so they can get right up behind you and start flashing you. Now, I have to say with some embarrassment, I've done that myself in the past. I'm not proud of telling you that, Richard, but I've done it. And I think, what is that all about? What's going on that causes me to do that? So there are almost these small things in life that are tremendous windows into how we, certainly me, how I take, why I take the way I do. And I really love to engage with those now. But my fears and my insecurities, back to the original part of the question, my fears and my insecurities, without starting to access those and be comfortable being uncomfortable, it's okay. They are what they are. Just because I try and hide them doesn't make them not a thing. They're just what they are. But if I can start to unpack them, I can do something with them.
Mm. And I think that, it resonated that our last guest was a guy who's all into being grounded, and he did this barefoot walk across Iceland. But one of the things that resonated with me was this idea of going inside. We're always looking out there. And you see that so much in management, right? Or leadership. We're always looking for the next technique, and I'm totally guilty of this, or paradigm, or approach, or whatever concept is going to help me be more effective. And of course, well, certainly in my experience, the most powerful insights and progression or learnings comes from when we go within and go inside.
Yes, and we talk in leadership about vulnerability, don't we? Making yourself vulnerable. I guess there's a reality to the fact that we're vulnerable anyway. Whether I make myself vulnerable, as in share with someone else, I'm vulnerable to those things anyway. And I'm quite often living out those vulnerabilities, those insecurities, those fears. Bringing it out often can spark, certainly for me, would have sparked, there's a risk. What will people think? And each time I've done something like that, I've always been really pleasantly surprised that people interact with me differently, saying, "Hey, I really appreciate you sharing that. Really appreciate it as the leader, you tell us about, because that's kind of hard for us too." And you think, actually, this is connecting with people. This is being real with people. This is being grounded, as you described it. This is powerful. It's not about beating yourself up. It's about being really clear about what's driving, motivating you in order to allow us to connect with people, and in a leadership context, in order to allow us to do something extraordinary and not be held back by those insecurities, those fears, those leadership traits that are running in opposition to the very thing we purport to stand for.
That's right. It creates an opening for an extraordinary conversation, doesn't it? It starts with, often starts with being vulnerable. Yeah. Okay. So Gary, the sort of the opening up, Gary is happening, and you're running these open sessions, and you're on this journey of getting to know self. And now there's a transition into your work in the faith community. So is that a part of a deepening of that, or talk us through that transition and what happened?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I left Kinetic. I was on a 6-month notice. I did about 8 months by the time I resigned and then left the company. But I didn't leave the company. Kinetic, a tremendous company, tremendous people. I didn't leave the company because I was unhappy or dissatisfied. I left because I thought, this is another opportunity and stage of my life where I can do something different. And I didn't really know what different looked like. And to be able to do something different, I need space to think about it and to understand what was out there, things I could do, things I could not do. And I've never had the opportunity really, or I've never created the opportunity, and I now have it in part because both my boys are over 18 and semi-self-sufficient.
Are either of them following their dad, or either of them becoming pilots?
No, goodness, no. No, in fact, a little anecdote, if I may digress slightly. Many years ago, I was flying out of the airfield, and Sharon brought the boys down to the end of the runway, and I was flying a Jaguar at the time, no longer in Southwest. But I'd go over the top of them, reheat in, and thinking, they're going to be loving this. And I was roaring. And I'd get back home, and I said, hey boys, how was it? They're quite young. I said, how was it? Yeah. Oh, it was really noisy, Daddy. Yeah, my tummy was shaking. I didn't like it. It was too loud. What? Loud? And then the final down to earth and reality was, Daddy, we saw a man in an army uniform today. Sorry? We saw an army man. Did you? That's nice. And they were so excited about it. And I thought, I've just been hurtling this multi-million-pound jet around, and you are totally underwhelmed. But now you're really excited about seeing the guy in the army outfit, which by the way, you should be as well. So yeah, another leveling as a father. So no, they don't. They really have no aspiration to follow me. In fact, probably quite the opposite. You want to differentiate yourself. I think it's good to differentiate yourself as well, isn't it, from your father? But hey, if they wanted to do it, I would support them fully. If they don't, I'll support them whatever they want to do. And maybe that's a shift for me as well. Is, you know what? It matters who you are and what you want, not what I want. So yeah, so I left Kinetic April 2 years ago, so a little bit more than 2 years ago now, and with the intention of just really trying to see what was out there. So I ended up coincidentally connecting with someone who leads a group of churches that our local church is part of, called Commission, and they've got about 50 or 60 churches in the UK. There's 60 or 70 in India, some in the Iberian Peninsula, one in Nepal, in the States. And he had a vision about doubling the size of their organization, size of the movement, number of churches, etc., by 2020. And I think the most extraordinary thing had happened, bearing in mind it's a community of faith leaders, where nobody had faith for the thing the guy leading it had faith for. Not possible. It's not going to happen. So I got connected with him and said, hey, tell me about how you got about this. And he said, I really don't know. And I said, well, I think I might be able to help you. I don't really know that much about what you're trying to do, but I can at least bring something to helping you with the international team, with your UK team. So for the last 2 years, I've supported them through creating a transformation program, for putting different leadership in place, for, I guess, engaging, communicating with people in a different way. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying this because I've shared it with them repeatedly. Some churches are the most hierarchical organizations ever. You know, if you want to see a hierarchy, how do I know? Because I see them all sitting at the front, all the leaders. And by the way, these are great people. But there's, unsurprisingly, just like the rest of the world, there's insecurities and fears. And those insecurities and fears cause us to, and often in many cases, there isn't really formalized leadership training or, how to lead people, how to motivate, inspire, enroll people in things you're doing, rather than telling people. So a big part of this journey has been about, let's start listening to your people. What do they think? Because if you don't know what they think, it's going to be pretty hard to lead them, because you can't tell them what to do. It's not an organization. And so I had quite a bit of pushback initially on, well, you don't understand. It's not a business, it's a church. It's volunteers. And I made the point repeatedly that people give of themselves for something they believe in. They give of themselves and they give of discretionary effort. And I had many, many, many wonderful employees in business who gave far more than they were remunerated for, because they believed in the thing that they're doing. They believed in the customer they were doing the work for, or whatever their motivator was. They believed in something bigger than themselves. So I don't hold the view at all that in a voluntary organization you can't enroll, motivate, inspire people to do the most extraordinary things. But that was quite a big part of the journey as well. But moving from, or helping them move from, hierarchy to, let's engage the people. These are the people on the battlefield. These are your people. Set them free. Let them run. And it's amazing what happens. So they've now launched their whole transformation program. I now just spend limited amounts of time with their international, the UK leadership team, just helping kind of steer them a bit, challenge, push back, but really just try and get alongside them again, which has been a tremendous privilege.
And was there anything different about, did you modify your style or anything else new that you learned in that context versus working with Kinetic?
I think in terms of style, by the time I got to there, I had significantly changed my own style as a consequence of my own understanding of self, people, desire to connect with people. So I think in that respect, I had broadly made that fairly major transition over the previous few years. But it was about context. So in order to effectively connect with them, I needed to understand their context. I needed to know more than I knew about what they were doing, why they were doing, what they thought, what they didn't think, what was their past. So trying to get to know them at an individual level and the collective level, looking at both how the individual created the group dynamic and what the group dynamic did with the individual. And so I'd often get alongside each individual person as well, and then as a group. But it's the learning the context you're in again, and not assuming that I understand the context. And that's just another reminder, to be honest. In order to be most effective, I need to understand the context, because if I don't understand your context, you're probably unlikely to feel that I'm for you, because I don't really understand what it is I'm for or who I'm for. So getting connected with the people is really important. So something very relational about that, which I think is so important in coaching and leadership and getting alongside people, is something relational, which builds safety, builds permission, builds an environment of trust where you can start doing things they otherwise perhaps wouldn't do.
And you were finding you having to do that sort of even more than your time with Kinetic, or was it you were just continuing with what you'd adopted there?
I suspect more in that I was sort of the only person there, whereas in the company I had a tremendous group of leaders working around me. We built a great team over a number of years, people who've been through similar equipping and development to various levels. Other people out in the business who had done the same, we brought in parts of this programs, and plus the fact we just got great people everywhere. So I think I felt a bit different in that I was the only person trying to press a different direction, bring in some things that people may have been uncomfortable hearing, but were very gracious about hearing, to be fair. And one of the things I noticed was their openness and humbleness in receiving pretty serious challenge. Because in order to be effective, which again, what does effective mean? But I felt I had to connect with them, relate to them, but I had to bring them things they didn't necessarily want to hear. But knowing I'm for them is really important. It goes back to the same thing. I'm for you. I'm with you. And as a leader or a coach, I think that's such a vital thing. It would be for me if someone was not like me.
Right. So because it was just you, and you couldn't, I suppose, lean so much on a team or a hierarchy of your own, perhaps, to have things happen. But that's interesting because often I hear people, when I'm working with people in organizations, very often the complaint is, well, it's just me. I don't have a team. I want this change to happen, but I don't have the people around me to make this happen. That's such a common concern for people. And it sounds to me like, well, one of the insights I'm getting from this conversation right now is, in that context, the relationships are even more important than ever, right? Understanding people's context and building those relationships.
Yes, yeah, and of course, in the absence of a pre-formed team, you are still forming a team. And so it can be a bit of a cop-out, can't it, to say, oh, I'm the only person there, I can't do it, it's somebody else's problem. No, actually, I'm 100% responsible for what's happening as I'm trying to lead them through a change. But I'm 100% responsible for ensuring that I'm working with them as an integrated team, that I'm not doing to them, that they don't think they're having it done, but they're stepping up as well. And I'm able to appropriately challenge and engage with them. But you are building a team. And as you will well know, Richard, from change and transformation, one of the really critical things is about who owns this change and transformation program. because it's not me. And we've had this sort of dance a few times where I've said, hey, this is not my program. I am facilitating you going from where you said you are, which, by the way, we ought to baseline a little bit more carefully, so you actually know the journey you've set off on, rather than where you're just going, and be really clear about where it is you think you're going. But it's not my program. And I've seen this working with other change organizations, a number of them, which is not about the people supporting the change. It's often about the leadership outsourcing leadership and responsibility and accountability for change. So I've tried to be quite careful to be really clear about who's, and in fact, as the program's really started to launch and take off now, they've got different leaders in place, I've backed right out, not because I'm not interested, but because if I'm just in there in the program, it's now still my program. It's not my program. It cannot be my program. Otherwise, it will never succeed. Or it's very unlikely to succeed. That it could.
Right. So there's two things there. It's building the relationship, understanding it, or three things. Understanding context, building relationships, but also making sure the ownership is in the right place.
Yeah.
You don't carry it. Yeah, that's powerful.
We just recently did a very well facilitated exercise on profiling, using a profiling tool. And I'm personally, having had pretty much every profiling tool done under the sun to me multiple times. And by the way, those are quite an interesting thing as well when you're less well developed in understanding yourself, because I really like to pick out the bits I like, and I really don't want to like the bits I don't like. But I have quite a sense that unless profiling is used well in a sort of holistic, integrated way, it can just reinforce a narrative. It can cause us to drive stuff underground, or to go back to the conditioning, the belief, oh yeah, that is what I'm like. Or you get this notion of competition. Hey, I'm why am I not red? I should be. Oh, I'm only green. Yeah, great that you're green, thanks, because I don't need three of me in a room. And getting the sophistication of that, or getting that done appropriately, is so important. So we had a lady who's professional at this do some work with this team recently on profiling, and fascinating. If nothing more than gives me a different window into other people aren't like me. No, I intellectually knew that. I probably emotionally, relationally knew it, but now they could start to see that they really, really weren't like them. And so, what's a more effective way to integrate with them, with me, with others, and recognizing that the people they're leading have a whole spectrum of personality types, behaviors, narratives, backdrops, contexts. My goodness, it's a complex world, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we try to boil down into this little single statement of stuff, you think, that stuff shouldn't even be coming out of my mouth. It's not,
Yeah, that highly complex, and it's almost like, you have to give up trying to comprehend the full complexity of one situation and just.
Yeah, you do, absolutely.
You have to sometimes act as if the world isn't quite as complex as it really is.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so otherwise it'd be pretty hard to do anything, wouldn't it? There's so many components to it. But being aware, it's so powerful, isn't it? I don't necessarily have to be, trying to run like a supercomputer in every small interaction, but having awareness doesn't half help when it's overlaid with an awareness itself.
Right. Yeah, that's self. If there's one, I suppose again for me, if there's any complex system worth investing in understanding, then there's no better place to start than my own organism. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of self, so we just taking you back to your first insight in terms of where you yourself and your first understanding was around fears. Is there an evolution to that story now? Is that still the main theme in terms of the work you're doing on yourself, or is other stuff emerged over the period?
Yeah, so part of this connects to my faith as a Christian, because I think a couple of years back, I went to a conference called the Father's Heart Conference. And in there, the main theme was about self-parenting. And they were sort of describing these components of self-parenting and these characteristics of people who self-parented. And I sort of got to the end of that and thought, oh my goodness, I've got most of those. But the night before I had gone there, for some reason, I was sitting in the exercise bike in the garage, and I started typing out just little notes about my life. And going back to school, what I thought, what I felt, what happened at each stage of that. And I just had this sort of pretty random set of things, but what it did for me is it started to open up, wow, there's something going on here for me that's got a lot of components to it that's worth unpacking. And so when I went to this conference and had this notion of, because as a Christian, I very much believed in God and Jesus, and but I didn't really understand who he said I was. I didn't understand who I was, my identity. My identity was wrapped up in things I did or hadn't done. And often it's what you haven't done that forms an identity as much as what you have done. And I would often say, because I would underplay when people asked me what my job was, I would say, oh, I work with whatever. I would always try and play it down. I would always try and sort of, and Sean used to get really frustrated. Maybe just tell people what you do. Well, it's a bit awkward, isn't it? Why is it awkward? But what is a hiding in there? I don't know. Is it I don't deserve to be here? Why would you think I would be doing that? I don't know. But this thing about self-parenting then took me back to what I was talking about earlier with my father, and where do you get that emotional connectivity from if you don't get it in those formative stages? And how do I act and behave as a consequence of that? And I think that was another key accelerator or catalyst to considering some of those deeper aspects that I hadn't previously really considered. I had done the unpacking of self, not the narrative that sat behind self to the same extent. I recall teachers telling my parents, a week before, maybe 2 weeks before my O-levels, that, I would be, be lucky if I passed, if I, any of my exams at some levels to sit. I remember my German teacher, I had a desk out, this is embarrassing, really, isn't it? 16 or something. I had a desk out the front of my own, not because I was disrupted because I just would laugh and I found stuff really funny. And so I had this little desk so I wasn't distracting other people, and they would say to my mum, my parents, he's a really, really, really lovely boy, but he's a bit distracted. He's, seems a bit bored. Well, I was seriously bored. But the head of the German department, quite a big school, I remember him walking past behind me, talking to the rest of the class about A-level, and he said, well, you won't be doing it, Borland, will you? And that's interesting, isn't it? So again, there's something being spoken over us. This might be his way of motivating me, but without context, without knowing me, you can do the opposite. Anyway, long story short, I ended up getting 6 A's and a B. And people fell off their chair, no more so than me, I have to tell you. And probably my parents were very gracious in saying, yeah, we knew you'd do well. Yeah. Did you? I didn't.
Never doubted you for a moment, Gary.
I didn't. So yeah, I suppose that's the most recent kind of big thing that started to emerge for me, caused me to go into the narrative. What's my narrative underneath all of this? Because if I can understand the narrative better, I can better relate to self, and then I can better relate to others. And I've had some great conversations with people over the last sort of, 12, 18 months about their narrative. So you start to see things in other people where you think, wow, that's interesting. I wonder.
And what is it? So this is the story you tell yourself about yourself. Is that what you mean?
It is, yeah.
What's emerging for you? What do you think are the prominent themes of the story you tell about yourself?
I think the story I told about myself was that people only liked me because of stuff I could do for them. That I didn't really like myself. If I didn't like myself, how could my God like me or love me? And so neither my spiritual biblical narrative was really linked in a way that was coherent, that was a thing about who I was. And so my identity was all muddled up, and goodness knows what. So the thing about identity was such an important thing for me. What is my identity? And I've come right back to my identity is about who God says I am, and not who other people have said I am. Or that doesn't mean you can't take input and criticism, challenge, but there's something fundamental there, which was not good enough, not smart enough. I don't know, there's a whole story around self. Now, I would never have admitted this story, Richard, 2 years, certainly 5 years ago, because I would have been embarrassed by it all. I wouldn't have wanted to share that because it would have exposed weakness or something in me. It would have been embarrassing. What would people have thought of me? Just made it worse. And of course, now I'm like, do you know what? It is what it is. And I love to be able to share stuff with people and say, it is what it is. But tomorrow doesn't have to look like yesterday. It really doesn't. So I don't feel those things anymore. And as a consequence, I feel, that's why I'm really excited about the work with FirstHuman and you guys. I don't feel that at all. And I don't feel like I'm an expert in anything either. But I feel I've got a heart and a head in the right place for really getting alongside other people, getting in the trenches, as it were, to try and support them in that development, even at times where we don't even think we've got anything to unpack or develop.
Right.
That's really exciting for me, in order to do extraordinary things in the world.
Well, that's right. Go within. To go within, to go without. That's the way I see it, and that's.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. I like that. Yeah.
Right, and that's. That's a reference. The book's just slipped, but it just struck me as you thought. Just one thought that came to mind there is I had a therapist once, and she came at it from an emotional level and a spiritual level, but she did talk about the risk of what she called spiritual bypass, and that's this idea that we get to a certain level of depth with ourselves, and then we kind of almost prematurely say and I hand this over to God or to whatever my spiritual being is, as a kind of get out, right? Yes. To doing the deeper emotional work. Do you ever sense that as a risk?
Yeah. In fact, I might be deluding myself. I don't feel, for me, certainly at the moment, that's a risk for me, because I believe the stuff that I am and I've unpacked, I believe is entirely aligned with my spirituality and beliefs. But I see this frequently, and I call it the spiritual trump card. Hey, we're all, we all walk with a limp, don't we? Yeah, well, maybe it doesn't have to be that big a limp. Yeah, maybe I could take the ball bearings out of my shoe and, put two shoes on that are the same size and I wouldn't limp as much. I don't know, I'm using that in a silly way for effect, but the spiritual trump card. Yeah, well, actually, it's okay because God loves me, and it's fine. Well, it is fine, but I believe He wants so much more for you, and that unpacking. And for me, the whole, we get into whole science and religion and God, is it God's science? And do you know what? I think it's something powerful about really understanding self, really, really, really understanding self. But if I can pull out a spiritual trump card, and that becomes a defense mechanism for me, I never have to go there. But if I don't go there, it's going to seriously impact my ability to lead, motivate, inspire other people to do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And I see this with some spiritual leaders. I see that self-limiting. Because on the one hand, if the biblical notion is that nothing's impossible with God, yet here we are as spiritual leaders putting these little low bars and going after things that probably we could do if we didn't get out of bed. That doesn't feel to me, well, God will make that happen. Well, maybe He wants us to make stuff happen. And also for me, there isn't a conflict between my faith and trying to really get alongside people, whether they have that faith or they don't have that faith. Because my interpretation of my Christian faith is I'm called to love people. Yeah? I'm not called to love people who are Christians. I'm called to love people. So get alongside people. Whatever you're at, however you're at, I want to get alongside you and help you do extraordinary things in the world. That's what really matters to me. The two are really integrated for me, but they're integrated but not exclusive.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Fantastic. That's a great message to start to close out this interview. I mean, there is one question I always ask my guests, the final question. So for you, Gary, what does it mean to be human?
What does it mean to be human? I think for me, it's the integration, a relationship between that physical, material narrative, spiritual narrative, and for me personally, the biblical narrative, and how those things also. That's really what we've been touching on, actually, is how all those things come together in an integrated way, and how you synthesize and fuse those things in the right way. Because if you synthesize and fuse them in the wrong way, you create exclusivity, you create alienation, you create all the things that people will often look at from a spiritual perspective and point at and say, that's a problem because, and in many cases they're absolutely right, because it's inappropriately synthesized and integrated and fused. So for me, it's how those things come together that really matters, which goes right back to my point about, I'm called to love people. I'm not called to love people that I've been, not like that I choose out of a specific group of people and what they believe or don't believe or anything else. That's not what I'm called to do. And that's not how I want to get alongside people. I want to get alongside people on the basis of my integrated narrative connecting with your narrative. And I'm really happy with whatever your narrative is. I just want to get alongside and support.
Fantastic. Okay. So in terms of people understanding more about the things that we've touched on, so is there a link to your faith community that you'd like to share with people? Is for people who may be interested in that?
There's actually a link to the Commission website where there's an interview with the guy called Guy, who has been who leads the Commission group of churches. So there's a little interview with him. People can link on that. They can link further if they'd like to through the.
And that's the Commission. So
it's called Commission.
Right. So commission.org.
That's a great question. Actually, I don't know. I never looked them up. Maybe I should.
We'll put that in the description. So there'll be a link to that organisation, and of course you're an associate with FirstHuman if people are more interested in getting your coaching in a business context.
Yeah. Yes.
Fabulous.
Right, Richard. Thank you. It's been.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's been wonderful. It's so really, thank you for your time and for sharing as deeply as you have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.